Hey guys, welcome back to Frankbrox Art. I am Brian Broxton, and today we are drawing the Phoenix. And guess what? I finally got my shirts in. So I'm gonna have my link down in the description if you want to get like a Frankbrox Art shirt. I got some other designs in there. I'm still trying to figure out a way I can do like my illustrations and put them on t-shirts or whatever. I don't know. I may have to like just press them bad boys out, just do some little stick off, the little press on whatever shirts. I don't know. I'll figure something out. But anyway, at least you can get the logo. But yes, going back to the Phoenix. So let's check it out. Alright guys, I'm so excited because I finally finished Jean Grey, freaking aka the Phoenix. Now, she's not just another member of the X-Men. You know, she's like power, she's control, she's destruction, she's rebirth. Now, today I'm drawing Jean Grey, and I put together, like I usually do, the full process from start to beginning, the initial sketch. If I screw up, I start over, whatever. You'll see all that in this video. So let's get started. So now, if you've been following for the past week, I had to do, like I said, a little restart because like the first kind of design, it was, I don't know, it wasn't really balanced. I don't know, the footing, the pose and stuff, it didn't really feel right. So I had to kind of, start over again. I used a little bit of AI. I just put in a prompt and say, hey, give me a different pose, girl with red hair, blah, blah, blah. So, so I used that pose and that worked out a little bit better. So let's break it down. Now, when I get started with a sketch, I focus heavily on like the pose. I found one on, of course, my go-to Pinterest, and her posture, after drawing it for a little while, felt, it was a little, it wasn't like, I don't know, it's like the legs and, it wasn't looking right. It wasn't kind of balanced. And the way I drew it, it just didn't look right. The shoulders, they was relaxed. They was, had a little power in it, but the head tilt, I was kind of conflicted with that, and the hair, it was coming along, but hair isn't everything, you know what I'm saying? Now with the Phoenix, hair becomes a part of that energy. It has to flow upward like flames, but I kind of had it going to the side, because like my reference had it going up, but I was like, following kind of like my little AI kind of drawing that it did. I was like, I like the way it's kind of flowing to the side, like the air is blowing it to the side. So I just did it that way. So, but it definitely looks freaking natural. I love it. So, now one mistake that I made earlier, like I said, the proportions and the leg movement, I don't know, it didn't seem right. So, everything else was kind of like balanced, like the torso, it was looking okay. And I think if I had hacked that a little bit more, I probably would have, straightened it out eventually. But I was like, I just needed to restart. So that's what I did. So as an artist, you get attached to work and, and it happens, you're willing to, sometimes you just got to just scrap it and just start all over again. Usually what I've noticed, like when you start all over, you're a little bit faster, a little bit more about what you want to do. You kind of stay away from little mistakes that you made previously. So, and then, hey, the Phoenix it's all about energy and honesty, you know what I'm saying? So, so next, the Phoenix Force. So the Phoenix Force is more like destruction and rebirth. And Jean doesn't just gain power, she struggles with it. She loses control sometimes. She regains, herself after losing control. It's kind of like that revolving, life, death, life, rebirth, building back up, So And I think that's why she's one of the most layered characters in Marvel. Now, she's not powerful because she can destroy planets. She's powerful because she battles herself. So I wanted that duality in her expression, like a calm but intense. That's why I was kind of teetering between like giving her eye pupils or just leaving it white, like, she's already in her power, but, just controlling it. So now we move into the line work, like the line work. I'm proud of the line work. I started out with my sketch. I got into the line work and refining it. And sorry, I'm always coughing. Anyway, I cleaned up the jaw and refined the eyes and defined the flame shapes in the hair. And, I thickened the line work slightly to, separate her from, like the energy and the flames and stuff. Just helps when I'm adding like glow effects and, things like that. So, I kind of carefully, did the fingers, the hands. Sometimes it can make or break the drawing, and with the character channeling that cosmic power, the hands needed, some attention. So, I want to leave them kind of relaxed, a little control, but commanding. Now, this is where, we kind of start, getting into the color and, the choices and stuff like that. Now, this time when I start, when I finished up like my line work and everything, I went into like this other tool that I found online. I think it's like Vectorize or something, but anyway, I'll probably put it in the description or something. But I thought it worked a lot better than my image trace in Illustrator. So I used that to kind of like get my line work because it looked a little bit more crisper, a little bit more cleaner than like the Adobe Illustrator thing. But I'll probably put it in the description or whatever what I use, or put the website in there. So, but it was very helpful. So, so now we built the fire, and then I also, did a little scribble with flames and, add some layers and, some glows and stuff like that to it. It did various little things. But I didn't want the flames to look too strong. I want it to be kind of light, like, kind of like have some fade ins, fade outs, so, but yeah, that's getting long into like the coloring part and stuff. So towards like the end of it, I start getting into like a little bit of like the polishing and all that sort of thing. But I know, you guys want to know a little bit more about Jean Grey and her powers. So let's get into it. Now, like I said, Jean Grey, she's one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe, a founding member of the X-Men, a telepath, a telekinetic, a cosmic host to the ancient force of destruction and rebirth. But Jean Grey's story isn't just about power. It's about control. It's about identity. And it's about what happens when a human mind is given godlike energy. Now, this is the story of Jean Grey, aka the Phoenix. Now, she was born in Annandale or Hudson, New York. Now, her abilities, her mutant abilities first manifested in childhood after a traumatic event. Those who saw like the X-Men animated movies, I think they kind of showed a little bit, here and there. But when her best friend was struck by a car, as her friend lay dying, Jean instinctively reached out with her mind and connected to her friend's consciousness in her final moments. That psychic shock unlocked her telepathic and telekinetic powers. Now, she was a little overwhelmed and unable to control them, but her parents sought help from Professor Charles Xavier. Now, Xavier quickly, realized, Jean's wasn't just powerful, she's an Omega level. That's pretty dope. He pretty much placed, psychic blocks in her mind to protect her and the world from the full extent of her abilities until she was, mature enough to, to handle them, on her own. So Jean, she would become one of the original students at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and she was the heart of the original X-Men team, with Beast and I don't think Wolverine was even in there yet. It was Beast, Iceman, and I think Angel and Storm was in there. I don't know. Well, then maybe Storm wasn't in there. It was probably Jean Grey, Cyclops, Iceman, Beast, and Angel. Maybe it was probably the beginning team. So Jean Grey, possesses extraordinary telepathic abilities, able to read minds, project thoughts, alter memories, and even communicate across vast distances. So her telekinesis allows her to lift massive objects, create force fields, and manipulate matter at the molecular level. Now, but Jean's greatest strength isn't just raw power, it's empathy. She feels deeply, she loves deeply, and that emotional depth, makes her powerful and also vulnerable. Her relationship defined much of her story, especially her connection to Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, who I just finished drawing not too long ago. Now, their bond is one of Marvel's most enduring romances, but love becomes complicated when, cosmic forces get involved. So everything changes during a mission in space. And I think everybody's seen the animated movies, the movies, the live action movies and stuff, Well, then again, they didn't do a live action movie. It was only animated though. So, but anyways, so while piloting a damaged shuttle through, this lethal solar radiation, Jean sacrifices herself to save her team. Or so they think. Now, instead of dying, Jean is touched by an ancient cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force. Now, the Phoenix Force is older than the universe. It represents life, death, and rebirth. It seeks a host who can channel its limitless energy that it has. Now, it chose Jean, so when she returns to Earth, she is no longer just Jean Grey, she is the Phoenix. So at first, the power amplifies her abilities, making her nearly unstoppable. She heals, she protects, she radiates this cosmic fire, but absolute power is never simple, So now there was a part, called the Dark Phoenix. The Phoenix Force feeds on emotion, and Jean Grey's emotions, it's pretty powerful, So manipulation from outside forces, particularly the Hellfire Club, pushes her towards instability. Her power kind of spirals. She becomes Dark Phoenix. So in one of the most iconic and devastating storylines in comic book history, Dark Phoenix, consumes a star, destroying an entire alien solar system. Billions perish. So Jean is no longer in control, or is she? That's the tragedy. The line between Jean and the Phoenix blurs. Was she corrupt? Was she overwhelmed? Or was she, finally unleashed? To save the universe, Jean makes the ultimate choice. She sacrifices herself. And we saw a little bit in some of those X-Men movies, but they kind of botched it all. But in that moment, of clarity, of love for her friends, Jean Grey chooses death over destruction. Now, there is a part where, there's kind of like this death and rebirth, So, because, the Phoenix wasn't done yet, The Phoenix is, reincarnated. It's going to come back. So Jean Grey's story doesn't end there. So she dies and then returned multiple times in Marvel continuity, sometimes resurrected, sometimes relieved, or sometimes never really truly dead, sometimes separated from the Phoenix Force entirely. Marvel, they never kill characters. They always bring back some kind of way. So each return, forces the same question. Is Jean defined by the Phoenix, or is the Phoenix defined by Jean? Now, over time, writers, clarified that the Phoenix Force is separate. It's like a separate cosmic entity, one that, chooses Jean because she was worthy, not weak, not broken, worthy. So, as far as like a legacy, Jean Grey remains like one of the most important mutants in X-Men history. She has led teams, she mentors students, faced gods and battled, but, she represents like the struggle of power and responsibility at like the highest level. So she is compassion and destruction, hope and fire, human and cosmic. Jean Grey is not just a superhero. She's a symbol, a reminder that greatest battles aren't fought, against villains. They're fought within. And sometimes you can have to, sometimes you have to burn to rise again. And that's it. Anyway, if you like this drawing, click the like button, check out more of my videos, and I'm going to catch you later. Like and subscribe. This is Frankbrox Art. Peace out.